He laughed at her badge before he even knew her name, and that was the first mistake that would ruin his night. The rain had just started falling over the east side of downtown Baltimore, the kind of thin, cold rain that turns streetlights into smears of gold across the pavement. And by the time the first phone cameras came up, Officer Travis Cole was already standing in the middle of the block with one hand raised and his voice cutting through the night like he owned it. Naomi Brooks stood beside a dark gray sedan with both hands visible, her coat damp at the shoulders, her expression so calm it almost didn't belong in a moment like this. Cars rolled past at 20 miles an hour, slowing just enough for drivers to stare. A bus hissed at the corner. Somewhere above them, a train rumbled over steel tracks. And still, Naomi did not move. "Ma'am," I said, step back from the vehicle. Travis snapped, chest forward, boots planted wide, every inch of him performing authority for the crowd gathering under awnings and storefront lights. He had the look of a man who had never been told no in any way that mattered. Mid-30s, clean uniform, sharp jaw, the kind of officer people trusted from a distance and feared up close. Naomi took one measured breath. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were steady, locked on him with a kind of silence that felt older than the badge pinned to his chest. She looked like a woman who had already calculated everything around her. The patrol car idling behind him, the liquor store camera above the door, the teenager filming near the crosswalk, the radio clipped to his shoulder, the space between his anger and his judgment. "Officer," she said, low and even, "you are making this much harder than it needs to be." That should have been the moment he paused. It should have been the moment he noticed that fear was missing from her voice. But men like Travis Cole had a way of hearing calm as disrespect, especially when it came from a black woman who refused to shrink for his comfort. He gave a short, ugly laugh and glanced at the bystanders like he wanted witnesses, like humiliation only counted if other people saw it happen. "You don't get to tell me what this is," he said. "Not tonight." Naomi reached slowly into her coat with 2 fingers, every movement deliberate, every inch telegraphed before it happened. The block seemed to tighten around her. Even the rain felt quieter. When she pulled the leather case free, Travis's mouth twisted before he even looked at it. She opened it just enough for the gold to catch the light. FBI. It was there, plain as the city around them. Real. Official. Impossible to miss. And he laughed. Not the nervous laugh of a man confused by what he sees. Not the uneasy laugh of someone trying to recover. This was worse. This was the laugh of a man so committed to his own version of power that truth itself sounded funny to him. Naomi watched him without blinking. Around them, the cameras kept rolling. A woman near the corner whispered, "Oh my God." Travis shook his head, smile widening, and took one step closer like the badge in her hand meant absolutely nothing. Naomi closed the case with a quiet click, and when she spoke again, her voice was calm enough to chill the air. "Officer Cole," she said, "in about 2 minutes, you're going to wish you had believed me." For one long second, the whole street seemed to hold its breath, as if even the city understood that something had shifted and only one person standing there was too proud to feel it. Travis Cole stared at Naomi Brooks with that same crooked smile still hanging on his face, but now there was a flicker beneath it, something small and uncertain that he tried to bury under volume and swagger. "You think a fake badge scares me?" he said, loud enough for everyone on the sidewalk to hear. "You people always think if you flash something shiny, the rules stop applying." The words landed ugly in the wet night, and several faces in the crowd changed at once. A man under a restaurant awning lowered his coffee cup. A young woman filming took half a step back, not from Naomi, but from the sound of a uniformed officer saying the quiet part out loud. Naomi did not rise to it. She did not waste breath defending herself to a man already in love with his own version of the story. Instead, she stood with her shoulders square and her gaze level, rain gathering at the edge of her hairline, and let the silence around him do its work. There was something unsettling about her calm now, something that made the scene feel less like a traffic stop and more like the final seconds before a door opened somewhere he could not see. Travis noticed it too, but he responded the only way men like him ever did when control began slipping through their fingers. He got louder. He turned slightly toward the crowd, as if performance could cover panic. "Hands where I can see them," he barked again, even though her hands had never left plain sight. "You are not in charge here." Naomi glanced once toward the far end of the block, not enough for anyone but a trained observer to catch it. The motion was brief, almost invisible, but deliberate. Then she looked back at him and said, very softly, "No, Officer Cole. That is exactly what you still do not understand." The rain tapped harder now against the hood of the patrol car. Red and blue reflections stretched across puddles like fractured glass. Travis opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, the radio on his shoulder gave a sudden burst of static, sharp enough to make him flinch. He grabbed at it with irritation. "Dispatch, say again." "Nothing." Then another burst. Then a clipped voice, distorted by interference, speaking too fast for the crowd to understand. Travis frowned and turned slightly away, trying to listen, but the words seemed to come in broken pieces. Naomi never moved. She only watched him, and in that stillness there was an authority deeper than the one clipped to his shirt. Halfway down the block, headlights appeared through the rain, bright and steady, not rushing, not hesitant, just certain. A black sport utility vehicle turned the corner and rolled toward them with the smooth confidence of a vehicle that did not need to prove anything. It came to a stop at the curb without drama, without sirens, without noise beyond the gentle hiss of tires on wet asphalt. The rear door opened first, then the passenger side. Two men stepped out in dark coats, broad-shouldered, composed, their attention fixed not on the crowd, not on the patrol car, but on Naomi. The change in the air was immediate. Even before a single word was spoken, people on the sidewalk felt it. So did Travis. His posture tightened. His jaw shifted. And for the first time that night, Officer Travis Cole looked less like the man controlling the scene and more like the only one who had no idea what scene he had walked into. The taller of the two men reached Naomi first, his coat dark with rain, his eyes moving over her for half a second in the fast, quiet way of someone confirming that everything was under control. Then he gave the smallest nod, not dramatic, not rushed, just enough to signal recognition. "Special Agent Brooks," he said, his voice low and steady. "Are you all right?" The question hit the street harder than a siren. Travis did not speak. He just stared, as if the title itself had weight he had not prepared to carry. Naomi answered without looking away from him. "I am now," she said. The second man stepped beside the first, older, square-faced, with the kind of stillness that did not need a raised voice to command obedience. He held up a leather credential case with the ease of habit and turned toward Travis. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said. "Supervisory Special Agent Daniel Mercer." Each word landed clean. Controlled. Final. Travis blinked once, then glanced at Naomi's badge as though he were seeing it for the first time, as though reality might still rearrange itself if he waited long enough. It did not. The crowd had gone almost completely silent now except for the rain and the distant hum of traffic. Even the people filming seemed to understand that the scene had moved beyond spectacle into something colder and more serious. Mercer took one measured step forward. "Officer," he said, "lower your voice and listen carefully." Travis straightened, trying to recover the version of himself that had existed 60 seconds earlier. "She was being detained for suspicious behavior," he said, but the sentence came out thinner than he wanted. He tried again, this time with more force. She reached into her coat. She presented something that could not be verified on the spot. Mercer did not react to the explanation. He did not argue. He did not need to. He simply looked at Naomi, then at the badge in her hand, then back at Travis with a level expression that somehow said more than anger could have. "Special Agent Brooks is attached to an active federal operation," he said, "and you have interfered with it in public, on camera, after being clearly informed of her identity." That was the moment Travis changed. Not completely. Pride does not leave a man all at once. But something cracked. It showed first in his breathing, then in the way his fingers adjusted against his duty belt, then in the quick glance he gave the crowd, finally seeing not an audience for his authority, but witnesses to his collapse. Naomi watched all of it without satisfaction on her face. That was the part that unsettled him most. She was not gloating. She was not trying to humiliate him back. She was simply standing in the truth he had laughed at, and somehow that felt worse. "There has to be some misunderstanding," Travis said, and this time the sentence came out almost quiet. Mercer tilted his head slightly, as if giving him one last chance to hear himself. "No," he said. "The misunderstanding was yours." Another vehicle turned onto the block, then another, unmarked and dark, their headlights washing over wet brick and glass. The first bystander who had started filming lowered his phone just enough to whisper, "Man, that officer is done." Travis heard it. Naomi heard it too, but neither of them looked toward the voice. This was no longer about the crowd. It was about the exact second a man realized the power he trusted had limits, and the woman he dismissed had been standing beyond those limits the entire time. Mercer extended his hand, calm as ever. "Officer Cole," he said, "I need your service weapon and your full cooperation." And in the space between that sentence and Travis's next breath, the whole night turned. Travis Cole did not move right away, and that hesitation told the truth before his mouth ever could. A few minutes earlier he had owned the sidewalk with the easy arrogance of a man certain the night would bend around his uniform. But now the rain seemed louder, the crowd seemed closer, and the space inside his own chest seemed suddenly too small for a clean breath. His eyes dropped to Mercer's outstretched hand, then to Naomi, then to the growing line of dark federal vehicles at the curb, each one sitting there with the quiet confidence of a system much larger than him. "You cannot be serious," Travis said, but even he could hear the weakness in it. The sentence was no longer a challenge. It was hope dressed as denial. Mercer did not change expression. "I am completely serious," he said. "Hand it over." Naomi said nothing. She remained beside the sedan, one hand resting near her coat, the other holding her badge at her side, no longer raised because it did not need to be. The truth had already entered the street, and once truth arrives with witnesses, there is no putting it back in the dark. Travis swallowed hard and tried one last time to build a defense out of noise. "I was doing my job," he said. She matched suspicious activity in the area. She refused to comply. Naomi's eyes narrowed just slightly, not from anger, but from disappointment, so controlled it felt heavier than outrage. "I identified myself," she said. "More than once." The words were simple, but they landed like sealed evidence. One of the younger agents stepped closer to Mercer and spoke quietly enough that the crowd could not hear, but Travis saw the phone in the agent's hand and understood immediately what it meant. Dispatch logs, body camera access, street footage, timestamps, not rumors, not opinions, records, the kind that do not care how loudly a man explains himself after the fact. Across the sidewalk, several bystanders had stopped pretending to mind their own business. They were not cheering. They were not mocking him. Somehow that made it worse. They were just watching with the solemn attention people reserve for moments when power finally meets a mirror. Travis looked toward his patrol car as if it might still offer protection, but the flashing lights behind him now felt less like authority and more like a public spotlight. "Officer Cole," Mercer said again, his voice calm enough to be merciless, "this is your final opportunity to cooperate with dignity." That word hit harder than the others. Dignity. Because that was what Travis had tried to strip from Naomi the moment he decided she was the kind of woman he could talk over, corner, and laugh at in public. And now the very thing he denied her was the last thing being offered to him. Slowly, almost mechanically, he reached for his service weapon and released it handle first into Mercer's waiting hand. The motion was clean, careful, official, but it carried the weight of something breaking inside him. The younger agent stepped in, professional and composed, guiding Travis back from the center of the sidewalk, while another agent moved to secure the scene. No raised voices. No rough display. Just procedure, exact and undeniable. Naomi watched as the badge on Travis's chest seemed to lose its magic right there under the ring. He had worn it like a shield against consequence. Now it looked like nothing more than metal pinned to fabric. Mercer passed the weapon off and gave a small nod. "Officer Travis Cole," he said, with the formality of a door closing. "You are being detained pending federal review for interference, misconduct, and failure to recognize lawful federal identification during an active operation." Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, 2 minutes. Naomi finally let out a slow breath, not in triumph, but in release. Because sometimes justice does not arrive shouting. Sometimes it pulls up to the curb in the rain, says your full name, and calmly takes the night out of your hands. The handcuffs were not dramatic when they came out. That was the part most people misunderstood about moments like this. Real consequences rarely arrive with thunder. They arrive with paperwork, witnesses, recorded timelines, and calm hands that know exactly what the law permits. Travis Cole stood under the wash of his own patrol lights, shoulders rigid, face drained of the swagger he had worn only minutes earlier, and for the first time all night, he seemed to understand that the crowd around him was no longer seeing an officer in control. They were seeing a man being measured against his choices. The younger agent stepped behind him with quiet professionalism, speaking in a tone so controlled it almost sounded gentle. Travis did not resist. He did not argue. He only stared past the wet sidewalk as though looking for some version of the night where this had not happened, where he had listened sooner, where he had seen Naomi Brooks as a person before he saw her as a target. But that version was gone. It had vanished the second he laughed at the truth in her hand. Naomi remained exactly where she had been, beside the gray sedan, rain slipping down the sleeve of her coat, her expression composed in that same way that had unsettled him from the start. She did not watch with satisfaction. She did not step forward to claim a victory. There was only stillness in her, the kind of stillness built over years of learning how to survive rooms, hallways, interviews, checkpoints, and sidewalks where men decided what she was before she ever spoke. Mercer moved to her side, his voice lower now, meant only for her. "We have the scene secured," he said. "Do you want medical to take a look?" Naomi gave a slight shake of her head. "No," she said. "I am fine." It was the kind of answer strong people give when they are tired of being asked whether they survived something that should never have happened in the first place. Across the street, the bystanders had begun murmuring again, but the sound was different now. Earlier it had been curiosity, that restless human hunger to witness a public confrontation. Now it was something closer to reflection. A woman holding a grocery bag looked at Naomi with wet eyes and said softly to no one in particular, "He really thought she was nobody." Naomi heard that. So did Mercer. Neither replied. Some truths do not need help once they are spoken aloud. Travis turned his head slightly then, just enough to look back at Naomi. The arrogance was gone now. What remained was confusion, embarrassment, and the first raw edge of fear that comes when a man realizes his badge cannot protect him from himself. "Agent Brooks," he said, his voice rough and small against the rain, "I did not know." Naomi met his eyes for a moment, and when she answered, there was no heat in it, only clarity. "That is exactly the problem," she said. "You never thought you needed to know." The words settled over the block like a final ruling. Mercer gave a short nod to the transport team as another federal vehicle eased closer to the curb. No one rushed. No one grandstood. Procedure continued with the cold grace of a machine finally doing what it was built to do. The city kept moving around them. Tires hissed. Neon reflected in puddles. A bus passed at the corner with half its windows fogged. And in the middle of that ordinary Baltimore night, one woman stood untouched by panic because she had carried her truth into the storm, and one man stood in silence because he had mistaken prejudice for instinct and power for permission. The federal vehicle door opened with a soft mechanical click, and Travis Cole paused before stepping toward it. As if some part of him still believed there had to be a final interruption, a voice on the radio, a supervisor around the corner, a convenient mistake that would pull him back into the version of the world where his uniform explained everything away. But the street gave him nothing. No rescue. No sudden reversal. Only rain sliding off the roof lines, the low murmur of strangers, and the unmistakable presence of people who had arrived not to argue with him, but to document what came next. Naomi Brooks watched from beside the sedan, still composed, still dry-eyed, still carrying herself with the same centered quiet that had unsettled him from the first second he saw her. She had not changed. That was the truth Travis was only beginning to understand. The only thing that had changed was the story he had forced onto her, and now that story was collapsing in front of everyone. Mercer stood near the curb, one hand resting at his side, his coat darkened by the weather, his gaze moving between the agents securing the scene and the small cluster of bystanders who remained despite the rain. One of those bystanders, an older man in a navy windbreaker, lowered his phone and shook his head slowly, not with anger, but with the weary disbelief of someone who had seen too many nights like this begin one way and end another. Naomi noticed him. She noticed all of them. That was part of her training, but it was also part of something deeper. She knew that public humiliation left marks long after the street dried. She knew that for some people watching, this was not just one officer being detained. It was a rare moment where the script failed, where the person expected to absorb disrespect without answer remained standing while the system finally turned and looked at itself. Travis stopped near the open vehicle door and looked back again. The red and blue reflections from his patrol car crossed his face in broken bands of color, making him appear divided, almost unreal. "I want my union representative," he said, finding a little strength in the formality of the request. Mercer nodded once. "You will be informed of the process," he said. "That includes your rights, your representation, and the review of every recording made on this block tonight." Every recording. The word seemed to hit Travis harder than anything else. His eyes flicked toward the crowd, toward the raised phones, toward the liquor store camera above the door, toward the patrol unit behind him with its own body camera system and dispatch logs waiting somewhere in digital storage. Truth had multiplied while he was still trying to control a single moment. Naomi stepped forward then, only a few feet, close enough for him to hear her, without anyone else needing to lean in. "You asked me why I was calm," she said. Travis did not answer. He only looked at her, rain beating on his brow. Naomi's voice stayed low, but every word was clear. "Because men like you always believe the badge you recognize is the only one that matters." There was no triumph in her tone, no cruelty, just a hard, clean truth laid down where everyone could feel it. Travis looked away first. Mercer gave the signal, and the younger agent guided him the rest of the way toward the vehicle with quiet professionalism. The door remained open for another second, enough time for the entire street to witness the last small surrender of a man who had confused command with character. Naomi drew in a slow breath and lifted her face to the rain, not because the night was over, but because the worst part of it had finally told the truth about itself. The vehicle door finally closed, sealing Travis Cole inside with the quiet finality of consequence. And for a moment the entire block seemed to exhale at once. It was not relief exactly. Relief would have been too simple for a night like this. What settled over the street was heavier than that. Something closer to recognition, the kind that passes through a crowd when people realize they have just witnessed a truth too familiar to ignore and too rare to forget. Naomi Brooks remained where she was, one hand slipping her badge back into her coat, her eyes following the rain as it traced silver lines down the windows of the federal vehicles. She looked neither triumphant nor shaken. She looked tired in the way only deeply disciplined people allow themselves to look after the danger has passed, when the body begins to release what the mind refused to show. Mercer stepped beside her and kept his voice low. "The area is locked down. We have statements coming in already. Patrol dispatch is preserving all audio." Naomi nodded once. "Good," she said. Her voice was steady, but softer now, as though the hardest part of the night had not been the confrontation itself, but the old familiar knowledge underneath it. Mercer glanced at her. He had worked with her long enough to understand the difference between silence and peace. "You want a minute?" he asked. Naomi gave the smallest shrug. "A minute will not change what happened." Across the sidewalk, two women standing beneath the glowing sign of a corner pharmacy exchanged a look that said more than words could carry. One of them, maybe in her 40s, maybe older, held a folded umbrella against her chest and stared at Naomi with the expression of someone seeing a private memory reflected back from far away. There was respect in that look, but there was pain too. Naomi noticed it. She noticed how many people were still watching, not because federal agents on a rainy Baltimore street were unusual enough to hold attention, but because something more intimate had been exposed here. A line had been crossed in public, and for once the world had not asked the person on the receiving end to simply carry it home in silence. One of the younger agents approached Mercer with a tablet shielded under his jacket from the rain. "Body camera feed confirms full verbal identification before escalation," he said. Street cameras caught the badge display clearly. Audio from dispatch places Agent Brooks on approved movement through the corridor at 2100 hours. Naomi listened without reacting, but the details mattered. In stories people tell themselves after nights like this, facts are often the first casualties. Not tonight. Tonight, the facts had arrived fast, lined up clean, and refused to move. Mercer gave a short nod and turned back to Naomi. "Internal Affairs has already been notified through the Federal Liaison Channel," he said. "This is going higher than district level." Naomi looked toward Travis's patrol car, lights still washing the street in red and blue. only now they felt stripped of all the confidence they had carried earlier. It should, she said. This was never just about one stop. Mercer did not argue. He had seen it. Too many times. A single encounter that was never really single. A single voice that carried years of assumption behind it. A single laugh aimed at a black woman holding proof of who she was, as if truth needed permission from prejudice before it could count. Near the curb, the older man in the navy windbreaker spoke quietly to no one in particular, but the words carried in the damp air. She did everything right, he said. Naomi heard him, and this time she turned. Their eyes met across the slick pavement, and she gave him the slightest nod, not because his words fixed anything, but because sometimes being seen clearly is the closest thing a broken moment offers to grace. The rain kept falling. The city kept moving. But on that block, under those lights, the old script had failed, and everybody still standing there knew it. By the time the first federal vehicle eased away from the curb, the rain had turned from a sharp evening drizzle into a steady silver curtain, softening the edges of storefronts, street signs, and faces, but it could not soften what had just happened. Naomi Brooks stood under the spill of a pharmacy awning now, not because she needed shelter, but because Mercer had insisted she step out of the center of the scene while the rest of the block was processed. A young agent handed her a paper cup of coffee from somewhere nearby, and the heat against her palms felt strangely human after a night shaped by radios, badges, and public judgment. She thanked him with a quiet nod and looked back toward the line of federal vehicles. Travis Cole was no longer visible, but his absence somehow occupied more space than his presence had. It was in the way people kept glancing at the empty patch of curb where he had stood. It was in the way the bystanders still lingered, as if leaving too soon would turn the night back into the old story they had all expected. Mercer joined her beneath the awning, rain sliding from the shoulders of his coat, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The city made its own sounds around them. A delivery truck rattled past. A neon beer sign buzzed in a diner window across the street. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed too loudly, the kind of laugh people use when they want to shake off discomfort without admitting it touched them. Naomi wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and stared out at the reflections on the pavement. He was never looking at me, she said at last. Mercer glanced at her. No, he replied. He was looking at whatever story made him feel right. Naomi gave a faint, humorless smile. Exactly. It was not bitterness in her voice. It was exhaustion sharpened into clarity. She had lived long enough inside institutions to know how often harm arrived dressed as certainty. A person did not always need hatred in his heart to do damage. Sometimes all he needed was the assumption that his fear deserved authority and someone else's dignity could wait. On the sidewalk near the corner, the older man in the navy windbreaker was still there, speaking softly with the woman who had whispered earlier. Their voices drifted in broken pieces through the rain, but one sentence carried clearly enough to reach Naomi. My daughter drives home alone every night, the man said. This is what she worries about. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment, and something in her face shifted, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the private cost of being the person who remains composed while everyone else learns a lesson from your pain. Mercer noticed. You do not have to carry all of this tonight, he said. Naomi let out a slow breath. I know, she answered. But people like him count on that. They count on the moment ending before the meaning catches up. Mercer said nothing because there was nothing to correct. She was right. Meaning was already catching up now, not only through reports and footage, but through memory. Through the people who would go home and retell this night in kitchens, cars, group chats, and living rooms. Not as gossip, but as proof. Proof that the woman he dismissed had stood in the rain and let the truth arrive on its own terms. One of the agents approached with a folder protected beneath his jacket and murmured something to Mercer about timelines, witness statements, and departmental notification. Mercer took the folder, scanned the first page, then looked at Naomi. He will not be back on the street anytime soon, he said. Naomi looked out at the wet glow of the block, at the patrol car lights still cutting through the dark like tired ghosts of authority, and took a careful sip of coffee gone slightly bitter from cooling too fast. That is not the same as change, she said. Mercer nodded once. No, he replied. But it is a beginning. Naomi held his gaze for a second, then turned back to the rain. She had heard promises before. She trusted records more than reassurance. Still, Beneath the weight of the night, there was one thing even she could not deny. For once, the system had not asked her to disappear quietly after being disrespected in public. For once, the truth had stayed on the scene long enough to be seen. When the last of the statements had been collected and the final camera angles logged, the block began to loosen at the edges, not all at once, but in the slow human way a night releases people after it has asked them to witness more than they expected. The rain was lighter now, a fine mist hanging over Baltimore like the city itself was thinking. Naomi Brooks stood beneath the awning with the paper cup warming her hands, though the coffee had gone lukewarm minutes ago. Across the street, the pharmacy sign still glowed blue through the damp air, and her gray sedan sat where it had been all along, quiet, ordinary, almost impossible against the memory of everything that had unfolded beside it. Mercer closed the folder in his hands and gave a small nod to the last agent remaining near the curb. The patrol car lights were finally dimmed, and without their constant flash the block looked almost honest again. Not healed, just honest. Naomi stepped forward from the awning and took in the street one more time. The puddles, the brick, the storefront glass, the people drifting away in twos and threes, each carrying some version of the same image home with them. A black woman standing still in the rain while the man who laughed at her truth disappeared behind a federal door. Mercer came to stand beside her. "Your vehicle is clear," he said. "You are good to go." Naomi nodded, but she did not move toward the car right away. Her eyes rested on the spot where Travis had first raised his voice, where he had spoken to her like certainty was proof and power was permission. "He will say he made a mistake," she said. Mercer did not disagree. "Probably." Naomi looked down at the coffee cup, then set it gently on the edge of a newspaper box. "That word has protected too many people," she said. "Mistake makes it sound accidental, like he tripped over his own prejudice." Mercer let the silence hold for a beat. "What would you call it?" Naomi turned her face toward the wet streetlights and answered with the kind of calm that comes only after anger has burned clean down to truth. "A decision," she said. "He made a decision about who I was before he ever cared who I actually was." The words settled into the night with the weight of something final. Nearby, the older man in the navy windbreaker started to leave, then paused long enough to look back at her one last time. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his cap in a small, respectful gesture and kept walking. Naomi watched him go. She knew he was not saluting her badge. He was saluting the fact that she stayed standing. That mattered. In a country where too many people confuse survival with silence, staying standing matters. Mercer opened the passenger door of an unmarked vehicle for one of the agents, then looked back at Naomi. "You did everything right tonight," he said. Naomi gave the faintest smile, tired and real. "That is not what saved me," she replied. "What saved me was that this time the truth arrived before the lie could settle in." Then she walked to her sedan, unlocked the door, and paused with one hand on the handle as the mist drifted around her coat, and the whole city seemed to listen. There are nights when a badge becomes a mask for ego, and there are nights when truth strips that mask away in front of everyone. Travis Cole thought authority lived in the volume of his voice and the metal on his chest. Naomi Brooks knew better. Authority is not what you use to make someone feel small. It is what remains when the noise is gone, the cameras are still, and the law finally remembers what it is supposed to protect. He wore a badge like it could place him above consequence. She carried hers like a promise. And in the end, the difference between them was only 2 minutes long, but it was enough to change who walked away free.